We are live on Thursday, May 1st, 2025 in House Transportation. And a long time no see. Our fiscal analyst from JFO, Logan Newberry, is going to join us and give us a preview, an update on what did the Senate do to our very concise, well thought out, team built, solid T-bill that they have then since taken in their deliberations, and what have they done to it? And Logan's going to start to give us a preview of that.
Yes, so for the record, Logan Newberry with the Joint Fiscal Office. I will walk you through some of the money changes that the Senate made to the T-bill.
And are there any documents yet associated with the comparison or any of that, or is there going to be?
There is, I'll pull it up here. Should be on your committee page. Great. There's the fiscal note, and then there's the two budget documents that we have seen before.
Chance.
I'll take one too.
Change the fiscal note. Has not really changed since the Senate. They didn't make any changes that had a fiscal impact as far as revenue is concerned. If I can walk through that briefly. And then the other two documents are the comparison. So I've added in the Senate column here. And then the budget as passed by the Senate. So we'll go through the comparison first. As far as the numbers for the programs themselves are concerned, they haven't made really any changes to the sort of core programs here. As you notice, the costs, these are all the same that came out of the House, with a couple, really one change, and that is, I haven't listed it here. I'll go to this other document, the appropriations overview. Within the Town Highway Non-Federal Disaster Program. So originally in the GovRec, the House version of the T-bill, it was funded at 1.15 million T-fund dollars. The Senate decided to fund this using pilot fund monies. So there's some leftover in the pilot fund, which is the payment in lieu of taxes. They decided to use $1.15 million of pilot funds to pay for this program and free up the T-fund money, which you will see in the one-time appropriations. They've appropriated $600,000 of this freed up money to go to this demand response volunteer coordinators. And I'll leave the specifics of what this program is and the entire thing to Damien when he goes to the language, but essentially it's money to help public transit agencies hire people to help coordinate volunteer drivers for non-emergency medical transit. I'll let Damien get to the specifics of it, but that was sort of one of the larger changes. You'll also remember in the House version, the Appropriations Committee put aside $1 million of general fund money to go to pay for the EMBA. The Senate took that money out with the understanding and further discussion with the agency that they fully expect to receive the federal money that we were sort of uncertain of when it passed out of this committee. So they removed that $1 million of general fund. They've kept the $1.4 million going to ACCD for the EV charging, which you all had in there as well. And then they added in this volunteer coordinators grant for $600,000 paid for with sort of a shifting of funds from T fund to the pilot fund.
Can you tell me what the pilot fund is? What's that not ringing a bell?
So I can't tell you specific, but if you want to get into it.
I mean, where's part of that in the budget?
So it's usually not within the transportation program. It is the payment in lieu of taxes, and a really sort of brief explanation of it is like in Montpelier, we have a lot of state buildings that don't pay taxes on those buildings. So they get payments in lieu of the taxes they might levy on the state building, for example.
So this is like appropriations.
Yeah, so this came out of
So I'm feeling better, and I was like, what the heck is this?
no. This came out of their work with Senate Appropriations. They came to this decision. Essentially, out of the Senate Transportation Committee, the 600,000 was originally requested to be funded with general fund. The Senate Appropriations said that they didn't want to use the general fund and would rather do this pilot fund swap and use T funds to pay for this demand response volunteer coordinator.
So basically, we have $1.6 million that's intertwined with the big bill.
We have 1.15 million.
Well, the 600,000 you said were the pilots, and then we have the 1 million from the MBUP, right?
Well, that's no longer in the Senate's version.
Well, I'm just saying, but it's in ours. What I'm
Yeah,
saying
it's
is
in the House's version.
intertwined, just like we have 1.6 that's still in play. Ours can't close after the big bill is what I'm saying. Right?
Yes, the
Because I think the
this
big
bill
bill
goes
might close
to
before ours, but that's not allowed. I'm just trying to think what's intertwined is 1.6. There's more than that.
potentially more than that, depending on what gets decided in both bills. But yes, both this bill and the big bill will need to be coordinated together to make sure the money lines up, and that is part of what I will be doing going forward. So it'll be a question of, do the pilot funds stay in as they have them now? If the pilot funds don't stay in, then there's a question of funding this $600,000. There's also the question of the 1 million that House appropriations put in, Senate appropriations took it out. If it stays that way, is a question that will be decided in the conference committee for the big bill. And we will need to sort of make those changes as they occur in the T bill conference committee as well.
All right. And are you gonna get to the impacts of the SSI and logging in those numbers?
So that is within, it doesn't show up here in this budget, but I can sort of explain it, and then Damien can walk you through the language construct that they come up with. But the Senate passed two bills, the DMV bill, which we're working on, and has the Senate's version had a fiscal impact of $353,000. Then they also passed S46, which had an impact to the T fund of $333,000. So the total, the Senate was sort of reducing revenues by $686,000, I believe math was. So they created a construct in the budget to essentially tell AOT to have an unobligated fund balance starting next year of $686,000 to essentially make whole their budget. And Damien can walk you through the language. Essentially just tells them that at the start of next year, they need to have at the sort of bottom line of the operating statement, a free $686,000.
I have to laugh at you, but oh God. All right. Might be a point at desk.
So that will also be, yes, if this committee decides to make changes to the bills that the Senate passed over in those two bills, that number might change. That construct could be removed altogether, depending on the fiscal impact passed out of this committee. These are all sort of the fluid numbers that we will have to be cognizant of going into the conference committee and make sure that everything sort of lines up and evens out at the very end between.
And that's on top of the $30 million shortfall that we're facing next year, that we're supposed to find 686 to leave on out. That's why I laugh.
Yes.
So, yeah. All right. So they didn't want to cut anything, so they just sort of,
They asked the agency. To do
Yeah.
it, yes.
To find it for next year.
yes.
So we just visited the District 8 garage. It's located in Swanton. And the expectation from Swanton is they're going to get a payment in lieu of taxes. This 1.1 million that came out of this other fund, which is somehow listed as town highway pilot funds under 9.17. I've never heard of the town highway non-federal disaster pilot funds on the line that we went through before.
The pilot funds section there is just a note for me and anyone else looking to know that it is coming from the pilot fund. Normally it is funded with T fund dollars.
Well, sort of like under the idea of revisions, et cetera, wouldn't this money, if it was in the pilot fund, be already earmarked towards some town that is,
So my understanding of the pilot fund, and if you want to get deep into it, my colleague Ted should come in and speak. He's sort of the expert on the pilot funds. But that this is from a sort of excess money within the fund outside of what they need to make payments to the towns. And so they had some money sort of left over that is going to a number of different places within the budget. I don't know all of them. One of the places Senate Appropriations decided they wanted to put some of the excess money was into this or federal disaster portion of the T-bill. My understanding is this will not impact town payments in any way.
so it wasn't AOT money in the pilot funds, it was.
It was pilot fund money that they're now giving to the T fund.
I served on multiple committees in the House, and one of them was appropriations. I guess I would have all kinds of ways of finding out where there's money. Anyway, so how does the line ACCD, EFSE funding become a T fund money of 1.4 million there that we have to send over to build chargers as part of the previous T bill? Is that not happening now? Is that what-
That's still occurring in both versions. That money is coming from changes being made to the current budget, the FY25 budget, the GovRec BAA, which is now just going to be in the budget, proposed a transfer from the T fund to the TIB fund of $2.3 million to make whole the TIB fund. The actual number that needs to be transferred was only $900,000. So we and you all did this in I guess the appropriations did it, but the House did it in their version and the Senate agreed to reduce the transfer to 900,000 instead of 2.3 million, which frees up the 1.4 million you see here, which then is going to be transferred to ACCD.
So that still happens. Okay.
So yes, that's the same between the House and the Senate. The changes in one times are they added the direct response volunteer grants and removed the general fund for the EMBA.
So there is a new program called the Demand Response Volunteer Coordinators, and Senate Transportation is going to fund them with $600,000 to start.
So I will defer to Damien because I don't exactly remember what the language says,
I'll
but
clarify.
it is grants I'll leave it up to Damien, but it's not a new program within the agency, and the agency isn't hiring anyone. It's the public transit agencies that will be doing the hiring, and this is giving them grants, is my understanding.
Yes.
They manage that program.
Yeah, and also
Created.
it's multiple programs. But yeah, we'll talk about that. Basically, there's a need for additional volunteer drivers within the program. And this is hiring grants to help the agencies hire coordinators for their volunteer programs to recruit and retain those volunteers so that they have sufficient drivers for this. And we'll get into it in more detail when I do the walkthrough.
Also make note that the math coming out of the Senate version of the T-bill leaves essentially $550,000 of T fund unspent. Just will be on the bottom line of the T fund going into next year.
Unspent,
Unspent.
how's that?
Because of the use of pilot funds for this program, they freed up 1.15 million of T funds and are only spending $600,000 of it, leaving $550,000 unspent.
I mean, it may have stopped you, but why would they leave the rest to next year to be unobligated, why do they? Doesn't make
You
any
could
sense.
ask them, my understanding would be that they expected the construct that we talked about earlier, where they were gonna have unobligated funds left at the balance.
Yeah.
Would be reduced in the conference committee. This was an amendment made after the bill was passed out. So I believe they expected some of the constructs to change the final numbers to balance out at the end, so they would reduce.
Leeway, all right.
So the 686 that they put in the language of the T-bill would just be reduced by 550, and they get 100 and something thousand that they need to leave on the bottom.
All right.
Is that appearing there on this chart?
It does not appear on this chart, but it will be in the language that Damien will walk through with you. You can see it all there.
Anybody have any other questions?
And the fiscal note has been updated to reflect theirs, but as I mentioned, there are no sections. It's a de minimis impact, same as coming out of this committee. The sections might have changed. They most likely did change, but it's still the same fiscal impacts as was presented to this committee.
Okay. I guess unless there's any other questions, we're gonna hear from Damien from our Ledge Council on the changes in some of those constructs that you just.
I'll be here to answer questions when they come up in the language.
Okay.
That way you can see what they're actually saying in the bill with what I've told you now. That may not make that much sense just
I'm
on this
looking forward
chart.
to that, yeah,
Yes.
I wasn't following all this.
That's fair.
That's what we have our vice chair for. So he follows it year after year after year. Okay. Thank you very much.
Right. See everyone again.
Come back.
Here, for the record, I'm Damon Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. Where would you like to start with this? So you passed a bill that was 22 pages. The Senate bill is over 50. And right now there is not an official version of what passed the Senate floor yet. I do have a side-by-side where I've incorporated everything as I understand what happened on the Senate floor. And otherwise I can walk through. So basically Senate Transportation passed out one strike all amendment. A week later, they passed out 5 additional instances of amendment that incorporated proposed amendments from the Appropriations Committee. And those two were merged on the floor at second reading. And as far as I know, there were no changes at third reading. You were all with me yesterday when the bill was taken up and passed in 3 minutes. So by the time I got the message that it was up, it had already been voted on. So what makes the most sense? I can walk through the each amendment in turn, or I can walk through the side by side with you, which kind of has everything. Or I can talk about individual items in there that pique your interest.
So the side by side is just reflecting the changes. It's 34
Yeah.
pages as opposed to 55.
Thanks.
Right, so yeah, the side by side, it's also single spaced instead of double. So That's how we got it down to 34 pages. And I took out extraneous headings and all that. So,
I'd say from the top.
Yeah.
from the top on the side by side.
And a lot of those things on the side by side haven't really changed. So there's only some.
Yes.
Significant change.
So, all right, let me pull this up on Zoom. And I will start taking you through it. First thing I'm going to do is see if my screen is readable to everybody here. Is that text big enough? Okay. I know I'm having trouble with my contacts today, so I couldn't read anything that Logan was showing from back in the corner, but that's just because one eye is blurry and one eye is clear. So anyway, probably more information than the folks at home need. Section 1, there are no changes from your bill. Section 1A, brand new. So this is the section that since the days of Senator Ash, the Senate has been adding every year to let you know what they're doing in this year's transportation program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, fossil fuel use, and save Vermont households money. Really what this gets down to is summarizing certain parts of the transportation program. So this highlights the just under 2.5 million spent on park and ride, which includes the creation of 60 new state-owned spaces, the almost $21.9 million in money for bike and pedestrian facilities, including the towns there that are featured. So see if there's anything in your district. And then transportation alternative programs, transportation alternatives program. These include both projects that are constructing things like crosswalks and additional pedestrian facilities, as well as environmental mitigation like clean water and stormwater things. So like enhanced culverts is one of them, and so forth. I'm seeing a question.
Well, sorry, so these are just things that were already in the budget. but
They're already in the transportation
organized in a
program.
Summary fashion, okay.
Right, so none of this is new.
Yeah.
It's just being called out.
Just new language.
Yes.
Describing the existing
This is
budget.
apparently a Senate tradition that I was.
All right, up
introduced
for
to this
amendment,
year.
just put it in the whole white book section, send it back to them.
Yeah. So, yep, so there's the 52.7 million for public transit, the 61.9 million for rail, including the factoid, which has been in several T-bills here, that moving freight by rail instead of trucks lowers greenhouse gas emissions by up to 75% on average. That is not actually in the transportation program, but it was added at some point in the past and has been carried forward. So that's what this section is. It just highlights features in the transportation program that relate to reducing vehicle miles traveled, fuel use, greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. All right. The rail program adjustment that you made in the House stayed exactly the same, but they did add, and Logan was talking about this just a moment ago, adjusted the town highway non-federal disasters funding source. So these are disasters that are too small to qualify for FEMA funding, but which could be crippling to a town's highway budget. So loss of a culvert on a class 3 road, something like that. And so basically we've just moved 1.15 million out of T-fund spending and are now covering that with pilot funds. And that's all that this is. So, questions? Yep.
Have we done that before? Towns that didn't qualify for FEMA.
Yeah, this is,
Funds.
this is a standard statutory town highway or town aid program. It's in the same section where we adjusted the funding formula for town highway structures
Okay.
and class 2 roads. So yeah, this is pretty standard. It's obviously not a huge pot of money, but it helps when you have, you know, a microburst or an isolated flooding event. All right. So Logan talked about the unobligated transportation fund balance. That's in section 3 of the Senate bill. It provides that the Secretary of Administration would be required to ensure that after closing this fiscal year, when they begin next fiscal year, there are $686,000 in unobligated funds sitting on the bottom line of the transportation fund. As Logan mentioned, that amount was built off of the amount of revenue that was reduced through S46, the logging bill, and through the motor vehicle bill. Your changes have reduced that reduction in revenue. Yes.
So, am I correct in saying, so, the logging and the, changes with the SSDI, in that bill, it's more than 1 year, it goes on forever, but yet this funding just fills the hole for 1 year.
Right. So yeah, this was going to fill the hole for 1 year. And so, but I think between not moving the logging bill and then taking SSDI out, you've taken care of over $600,000
Yeah.
of this.
If that happens, right, yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah. All right, the next is their section 4 requires 2 updates from the secretary on September 30th and December 15th to the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee to provide an update on the status of state transportation fund revenues and federal funding for the FY26 transportation program. And part of this came out of the uncertainty with federal funding, so provide an update on where that funding is at. Part of it came out of the downturn that we saw in T-fund revenues in March. So provide an update on that. If that's a continued downturn, it could affect the ability to cover all of the projects. And then it also includes a summary of legislative action that might be necessary. It includes authority for the Secretary of Transportation to request a meeting of JTOC within 14 days if there is a significant change in state revenues or federal funding. Significant is up to the Secretary to determine. So we're not defining that, but we're calling it out. And then if the decrease in state or federal funding is over 4%, then the Secretary has to provide JTOC with a detailed written report identifying the impact on projects in the 26 transportation program. So this is a sort of line by line in the transportation program, look at how they're going to reduce expenditures to meet the new reality in funding. And this tracks the revenue reduction plan that would already be required to the Joint Fiscal Committee anytime there's more than a 1% downturn in revenues for T-funds, general fund, or ed fund. So, questions? Everybody awake?
What's this significant change? Did I miss that?
That is up to the Secretary to determine. So we did not define that, and this is really just this is basically if the Secretary thinks that something has happened that is so significant that it's not appropriate to wait until September or December to speak with JTOC about how to address it, this gives the secretary the opportunity to say, I think we need to sit down in the next 2 weeks and talk about, these grants that were suddenly pulled back or whatever it is. Because it's going to significantly affect the transportation fund that you or program that you passed. So it's just giving them the opportunity to call JTAC together.
Is there an assumption that they're already having a Q2 check-in or meeting? Because this appears to be like Q3 and Q4 is.
Yeah, so it was set up that way so that the Q3 is kind of in the middle of the construction season and Q4 is after the close.
Okay, so it's more construction season, not quarters.
Yeah, and the September 30th check-in is also the end of the federal fiscal year. And so that was another piece that went into this. There was an earlier version that had a July, September, December. And part of the feedback we got from AOT was that they wouldn't really have new information in July. And so that there wouldn't be much to report. Okay, so sections 5 and 6, I know the vice chair is interested in these. These are the 10G reports. So how many of you know what I'm talking about when I say 10G report? Okay, so I'm seeing a mix.
Veterans.
So can I grab your white book?
Go for it.
All right, so in your white book, if you flip to the very back, there is a tab here, tab 26, called 10G reports. These are line by line reports on projects that are new. And then projects for which the total estimated costs have increased by more than $5 million or 75% of the estimate in FY25. And then projects funded for construction in FY25 that are no longer funded in this program, so that have been closed out. And then projects for which the total estimated cost has increased by more than $10 million from the preliminary estimate or by more than 100% from the preliminary estimate. So these are 4 things. It's in every transportation program every year, a line by line report. So it gives you a detailed breakdown by project of those 4 things to sort of give you a snapshot of what's going on. Thank you. So the proposal in 5 and 6, in section 5, there's a proposal for a new construct, which would be a dashboard that would show in sort of a graphical depiction the percentage of projects in each section of the transportation program that have been delayed by more than 1 year from the preliminary plan projected completion date, and the percentage of projects in each section that have increased by more than 50% or $5 million, whichever is less, from the preliminary plan cost estimate. So it's really sort of captures 2 of the things that are captured in the 10G report, but on a holistic scale rather than a granular project by project scale. And then it would require the agency to provide quarterly updates to that dashboard. And then section 6 is repealing the current 10G reports. So that section would no longer be in the transportation program that you get every year. And the timing of this is such that the dashboard would be available next January when you get the FY27 transportation program. But the 10G reports wouldn't go away until they would be there next January, but not for the FY28 transportation program. Does that make sense? All right. So that's what this is doing. Any questions?
I've got to assume that the agency is okay with producing a electronic board.
Yes, my understanding is this was proposed by the agency. So, but the agency's here and they can speak. So, yeah. Patrick is nodding his head, so.
Father Good Patrick Murphy, my city transportation, this was a discussion that we had with, the committee in the Senate, and, yes.
And some of this came from discussion too, if there was an auditor's report on projects that were over budget or had run longer than originally scheduled. And some of this discussion came out of that. There is, it really gets down to, from a policy standpoint, it's how's the information most helpful to you? And I can't tell you that, but this is what the Senate thinks makes sense moving forward. It's up to you whether you agree.
And I guess I'd make a comment that the idea that you said it was more holistic than granular. We have 11 members and we have a lot more towns represented, and the 10G is very town and project specific. And we get hit with questions from all of our colleagues on a regular basis, and we tend to probably spend more time answering questions about individual projects than perhaps the other body that is a bigger, represents a much larger group. So perhaps there's some thing somewhere in between that serves both groups a little bit better than that.
Say it happened to somebody from Louisville.
I'm trying to say that how people view it and understanding what happens to the projects in their areas is something. Now this is my 4th year, I guess, here. And is it really already 1, 2, 3, start of the 4th, middle of the 4th, end of the 4th? I can't remember the first one hardly at all, but we spent a tremendous amount more time in the white book some years than we did others. We did not spend a ton of time in the white book this session, but there is a huge amount of individual project information. Spent a lot of other spots. So I guess I'm highlighting that our committee tends to have historically has spent more time in the white book than perhaps other groups. So I'm just throwing it out there so the members understand that it's very important to people on this committee that have been here for a while. Yes, language.
Damien, could you, so I was a little distracted in the 10G report when you were talking about it. So just to clarify, so the Senate is proposing to get rid of this 10G report?
And replace it with a graphical dashboard that shows essentially a holistic view of sort of 2 of the things that are, so the 10G report has 4 different categories. New projects that are up $5 million or more than 75% over the estimate from the previous fiscal year. Projects that have increased more than $10 million or 100% from their preliminary plan estimate. And then all projects funded for construction in the previous fiscal year that are no longer funded in this. So in other words, we paid for
projects?
completed or closed out. So for whatever reason, and then in lieu of that, the dashboard would show projects that have been delayed by 1 or more year from the original completion date. And projects whose cost has increased by more than 50% or $5 million from the preliminary plan cost estimate. Yep. Okay. Other questions?
This may be too granular, but usually these dashboards are based on granular information. And so you can typically drill down. Is that how this database, do we know how this database is going to be set?
That is a question for the department, so I can't answer that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how it would be done for January. I would note that the, projects that are underway are already sort of posted on our website with their individual sites through the transparency website that I believe the committee has walked through earlier in the session. So that information would still continue to be posted, but what would be done in lieu of a 10G report is sort of the project shifts to, that maybe haven't, gotten underway yet. So that's sort of the new information that you would have through the dashboards.
So it would
But
have,
I don't know, if I can't speak to the, how detailed that information, how granular you would be able to drill into, specific data points at this point.
Given where we're at and the amount of pieces, and we're gonna have our briefing on rails and our section that we had to hit back on S-123 for a little while. How about some of the bigger highlights through here, and we'll come back to the details on it.
Sure, bigger highlights.
Like, I mean, what, I guess maybe I do. Why is the St. Albans thing on both sides, and what kind of change are we talking about?
That's a great orientation question. When you see the language on both sides, it means it appears in both bills. And for now, if you see no yellow highlighting on the right-hand side, it means they didn't make any changes to what you had. In a later version, for example, if you decide to vote not to concur and just send this to conference committee, what I would do in the conference committee is just replace that with same. So the section heading and same, but for purposes of this and transparency, I've got the language reproduced and then I ran a compare text. And anywhere there's a difference in the Senate version, I've highlighted it.
Okay, so if we're gonna look down through the columns, then the first, we're only looking at highlights on the right-hand side to see what.
Yeah. A couple of,
highlight additions.
yeah, if there's nothing on the House side, I'm not highlighting the Senate side.
Okay.
Because then you just have one side of the page that's bright yellow and
All
I
right.
don't know, it does funny things with my eyes.
When we see blank on the left, it means it's all new on the right, and then when it's both sides, so when we start with the St. Albans town piece, there's no change.
Yeah.
Don't need to worry about the underlining and whatnot, we're only looking for the yellow.
Yeah, so for example, the next point where you'd see changes to language that you passed is in the rail trail pieces, and there were,
A person.
yeah, we noticed a couple of missing words.
And then
Yep.
what is pursuant to subdivision 3408?
That's the existing $300 penalty that we based that $300 civil penalty off of. And so the existing law already says any person who violates rules adopted pursuant to this subsection, and those rules have to be adopted based on the provisions of the use of rail trails section, would be subject to a penalty of not more than $300. So the concern in the Senate was that they didn't want that to be read as creating like a double fine. So you could get two $300 fines. And so they just said, refer back to that because they don't think the intent was to create a new fine. We were just mirroring it. So, does that make sense?
Okay, yes,
All right.
then we're all the way down there.
Yeah, the next piece is the Green Mountain Transit Authority, the area there. So based on additional testimony from the Transit Authority, that language was updated from Chittenden County to the urbanized area of Chittenden County as established by the US Census Bureau. This is an area where I can actually pull up a map of it if it's helpful for the committee, but it includes Essex and Essex Junction and Williston, and it stretches down Route 7. So it's kind of a weird, almost lopsided star shape or something like that the Census Bureau has drawn based on its determination of what's urbanized. The takeaway from this is not cutting any existing fixed routes in Chittenden County. And so it allows those to continue. And that's the urbanized area is also what their federal grants are based on. Is their grants are to provide service in the urbanized area. And then you'll notice that they may operate service outside that area with approval from AOT. And then nothing in this section would be construed to prevent other transit providers from offering service that connects into that area or providing on-demand services in that area. So this, they felt that this better reflected the realities for Green Mountain Transit. And also it from my standpoint, it doesn't change the function.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, they were happier with the language. It doesn't change where you were at, which was we're going to operate the existing routes and then make changes as determined with AOT going forward. And we're going to provide them flexibility to operate around Chittenden County or possibly outside in the future, but only with approval from AOT. And this will also, the last sentence was intended to clarify that, you know, if the Green Mountain Transit isn't offering the link service, something could replace it with another transit provider offering that service for commuters coming in and out. So.
Okay.
I might add a hyphen between on and demand, since it's modifying services, but
Much appreciated. I will. So this, good to know. I will try to make a note of that. So.
So then we slide down to NA 15 is the next time you'll see anything where there's nothing on the left side, which means they added
Yep.
to the right.
Yeah, so this is 3 reports in a row. The first is, if you'll remember, they had language about the cancellation of locally managed projects and the recovery of funds.
We took it out.
We took that out. And this is instead requiring AOT to consult with the T-Board and the League of Cities and Towns and the regional planners, and then to work with a consultant to examine the requirements under that section and come back with language for next year. So all 3 of these coming sections here require them to engage a consultant to help facilitate the work. And this is within their is it program development budget within the transportation budget? Yeah, so this is all already within that budget. The next section requires looking at how we assess the need and condition of municipal transportation assets, and then asking them to come back with first an assessment of that, and then a proposal for a process to prioritize state aid for municipal assets that have the most significant impact on the regional transportation network. So the example that was given in the Senate repeatedly on this is, if you think of Route 2 over here and Town Hill Road going from Montpelier into East Montpelier, if something happens between Berry Street or Pioneer Street Bridge and the roundabout on Route 2, there's no way to get from downtown Montpelier to East Montpelier or Berry without going up Town Hill Road. So that makes Town Hill Road sort of a crucial regional connector in a way that, for example, and this hurts me because I drive on East State Street all the time. East State Street is not. So East State Street, there are multiple ways you can get around that, but Town Hill Road is a major secondary road. And so the idea is that all of the regions of the state have these roads. Most towns have roads like this that serve as important connectors or alternate routes. And so if you're prioritizing limited state funding, instead of giving a small grant every 3 years, the grant should potentially be focused on roads that will serve multiple communities. Does that make sense? Yeah.
so this is affecting. Well, I mean, it's not affecting the AOT's assessment of road status, because this is under municipalities, right?
Right, so we don't, I think part of what was driving this is that we don't have a great inventory or status. We have a great idea of the inventory and status of state transportation assets.
Right.
We don't have a good idea of that for municipalities. Some municipalities do a good job tracking this, others do not. And so this is trying to figure out,
Okay, kind of taking a step in that direction.
yeah, taking a step in that direction. It's important to note with this, nothing changes from the current way we fund municipal projects until you enact something. So this is just coming back with information and a proposal. But you would actually have to take the next step.
Okay. This seems like a sensible addition.
Mhm.
And then 17, this is looking at the state, town, highway aid and municipal grant programs. There are quite a number of these different programs. And the question that's being addressed with this report is, can we find efficiencies to improve and streamline the administration of these programs, potentially by combining them or streamlining the application process? And this comes out of a question that I have heard both committees asking, which is how much of these dollars that we're appropriating for this are being spent on actual paving or construction work, and how much is being spent on applying for and administering grants. So this gets back to that question of, you know, instead of having a municipality apply for 6 grants, could they apply for 1 or 2? And then potentially the state would also spend less time reviewing applications and so forth. And again, it's a report and you'll have to take the next step based on what you hear. So in the mileage-based user fee, the big changes here are, one, they're moving out the date. You had July 1, 26. They've swapped that to January 1, 2027 to provide an additional 6 months of lead time from assuming that we adopt an MBUF next session. Instead of having about a month's lead time, this would provide about 7 months lead time for implementation. They did some tweaking of the language. I'm trying to think. So a lot of the changes are swapping gas tax for fuel tax because we also tax diesel fuel. The language in number 4 comes out of concerns that were raised about wanting to make sure that the legislature reviews the fee before anything moves forward. And then if we go down to 12/19, which is on page 22 and 23, the intent section, you had the amount approximately equivalent to the amount collected by the state and federal government in gas tax revenue, and they have the average amount collected by the state in fuel tax revenue. So that's the big change there. You're looking at state and federal. They would prefer to look at state only. And then they also added in a second clause here that provides that the mileage-based user fee for battery electric cars would be an interim step towards gradually expanding the mileage-based user fee to all motor vehicles. So again, it's an intent section. This is not binding or permanent language, but it reflects the intent of this General Assembly moving forward. If you agree, right. So yeah, everything I say is contingent on if you agree and this passes. The last piece is they added in an update section, same dates as the updates on funding, to just provide an update on the design, the status of the federal grants and other funding for the design of the mileage-based user fee. Right now, my understanding is that the agency is expecting these grants to be issued by the federal government. So it's a little more positive outlook. But we still, I don't think the money's in the bank yet, right? So, yeah, money's not here yet, so this is basically saying check back in with us. Because obviously if there's no money to fund the development and the Senate budget has taken the $1 million that you had in the budget to move towards this out in anticipation of that federal funding. So this is looking at that. Questions?
What was the reason for removing the federal section of gas tax and or fuel tax?
My understanding is that they felt it was more appropriate to focus on the state fuel tax, and that if the federal government wants to impose a tax or not, that's up to the federal government. It's also worth noting that Congress is now considering an annual fee on electric vehicles nationally, as well as an annual registration fee nationally. So those are two other things that are potentially coming, but they're under consideration in Congress. So they had taken that out because they felt it was more appropriate to focus on just the state fuel taxes in this case. So that's potentially a philosophical policy point to be discussed in conference if that's where this bill goes. So
Would say that we get money back from the federal government for on our taxes that paid in there for road improvements. So it's not necessarily calculated that way.
right. The next difference is the sections 22, 23, 24, 25, and 24 and 25. Sorry, not and 26. We've seen this language before in more expansive fashion when we looked at what was called Kurt's bill, or what is called Kurt's bill. This is incorporating vehicle miles traveled into the planning and policy statements for state transportation projects. This is a version of that language that the agency had trimmed back in a couple of spots to a point where they were comfortable with it. And that's what passed out of the Senate there. So if you remember the Kurt's bill language that we walked through maybe a month back, this takes that and then it's trimmed down a little bit to what you see in here in these 4 sections. So it includes developing a mission statement that includes the need for projects that will reduce vehicle miles traveled when feasible, and then adding a policy with highways and bridges that would require, in choosing between the improvement of an existing highway and a complete reconstruction, weighing vehicle miles traveled among other things, as well as opportunities to reduce greenhouse gases. And then in developing the transportation program, striving to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not everything that was in Kurt's bill, but it's a portion of it. Okay. That gets us to the public transit demand response volunteer coordinators. This is a more involved discussion, so I'm going to hit the high points, and then given our time, we might come back to this later, unless the committee really wants to dive into it. So the public transit demand response volunteer coordinators, and more broadly, public transit demand response programs are a number of programs that we have in the state. There are 2 main programs. One is the non-emergency medical transportation, which is under Medicaid. And the other one is transportation for older Vermonters. Oh, I have the name in here. Unless, Jamie, can you remember off the top of your head? Older adults and persons with disabilities. Those are the 2 main programs, and then there are a number of smaller programs. Prior to the pandemic, we had a larger number of volunteers. That number of volunteers, if I remember right, fell by about half. And then since then, we've only recovered a fraction of the volunteers lost. folks provide rides for older Vermonters to things like medical appointments. They provide rides for individuals who are in substance use treatment, dialysis, a variety of programs throughout the state. And there are a couple of challenges for the program. One is it's expensive to provide this transportation, but it's crucial, especially to individuals who live in more rural areas where they can't take public transit to the hospital or something like that. And so this provides the opportunity to get a ride to and from your medical appointment or your dialysis appointment, et cetera. The other piece is that with a shortage of volunteers, there's often a shortage of drivers to provide these rides. And so what these sections look at, section 26 looks at bringing in, providing money to the transportation agencies on a geographically balanced basis to hire coordinators, to recruit and retain volunteers for the program. And I'll Representative Pouch, I see your question.
Yeah.
Section 27. This is trimmed down language from prior bills that requires the Department of Vermont Health Access to provide the Joint Fiscal Committee with an analysis demonstrating that executing the new contract with a provider for the non-emergency medical transportation program, they won't degrade the service to eligible individuals or impact the financial stability of the public transportation systems. I have to emphasize or note here that DVHA has objected to this language, even in the trimmed down form from prior versions. You're going to need to hear testimony from them and from the public transit agencies on the issues here. And you may also want to talk to folks who have been through this process in the past about what we were looking for. This language used to live in the big bill. It's in the T bill this year in a trimmed down form. One of the hurdles is background checks. My understanding is that for the Medicaid program, there are like 6 or 8 background checks required in order to be a driver for that program. And there is a lot of discussion about whether these are federal requirements or whether there's any flexibility in them. This language requires DVHA to begin meeting with the Public Transit Association, Agency of Transportation, and other stakeholders to identify potential opportunities to expand the pool of drivers, including looking at background checks and things that are causing potential volunteers to be barred from providing volunteer services in the program. There's a lot more detail in that in the section, but I don't want to dive into that right now. And then the third 29 is basically outreach. So there's a broader outreach for the demand response programs in subsection A, and then some limited informational materials provided by DVHA in subsection B. And then section 30 is looking at, can we provide greater coordination between healthcare providers and transportation providers to reduce the number of trips? Because one of the big limiters right now is if you're doing separate trips for each individual, you might be doing 6 trips for a volunteer in one day, all to the same hospital with 6 different individuals. And can we gain efficiencies there? There are issues potentially with this because of HIPAA and other health privacy laws. So it's not clear where the room to move is here, but that's something that is being asked to be looked at. And that gets us through that. So Representative Pouch.
Just to be clear, like the Medicaid, transportation, these are things we have to provide. And so, and it's part of the braided system. So we've given it to the public transit agencies to manage those programs. And we've heard several times that, hey, when we have volunteers, yeah, all we're doing is paying mileage basically. If we don't, we've got to find transportation or we even get taxis. So, and we heard that, volunteers have been a real challenge. So this seems like a smart idea, I think, to, help coordinate. And I think there are some public transit agencies that do a good job of getting volunteers and are more successful at getting volunteers, and others that aren't as successful. So this is really trying to turn the tide on the loss of volunteers to reinforce that program because it's a good one. And I think, many of the volunteers, I'm guessing, are seniors. It's an opportunity for them to help. Or we heard veterans who, it provides a slight little income for them and they, can help their neighbors get to their doctor's appointments and whatnot.
Yeah, I think there was a great deal of testimony in the Senate. I think there's acknowledgement that the programs are crucial. And then the devil's in the details with some of these provisions as to the agreement. The Senate made multiple amendments to this, but there's still some sections that with all of this, I think I couldn't do justice to the discussion and the nuances that have been raised by all sides. So I think if you want to dig into these, I'd recommend having in the advocates just to give you a rundown of the issues and what they're okay with and where the sticking points are. Because I don't think I can do justice to it in the chair here. There's just too many issues in Medicaid and older Vermonters, and the programs that provide assistance to them is way outside of my area of expertise. So.
Well, let's keep pushing through to the next.
All right.
Go through there and then
Can I just ask where the
$600,000
came from for this program?
So that money came out of the shift with the pilot fund. So pilot fund shift to the non-federal disaster freed up 1.15 million. $600,000 of that is being used for the volunteer
The
coordinators.
rest went to the bottom line.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm a little perplexed because I feel like we had a lot of public transit people come in and testify, and I don't remember any request or discussion about needing coordinators for these programs. I do recall one of the directors talking about a volunteer program, and he was actually going to be kind of trying to work it so that it was more of a taxi, so rides could be shared and people, I can't remember if it was combining Medicaid and not, but looking to be kind of more cost effective by not bringing one person, but bringing two, and maybe that second person could pay some kind of fee so that it would be more efficient. So I'm just a little perplexed at this whole request and detail there. Maybe I'm alone.
And I think that was in the microtransit, when they were doing microtransit to try to find additional riders to reduce the costs of that. And some of those microtransit riders pay, some don't. This is, these folks don't pay.
So this is not microtransit, it's not Gopher, it's something else.
Yeah, this, I think it's fair to characterize it as something different from, for example, Gopher for sure. But
Secretary Chris.
I think it's federal.
well, there's multiple programs here.
Well, it's pretty clear. We need some explanation.
Yeah.
We're
Make a motion here.
Yeah. So.
Right.
What else we got left?
We're on section 31, so just 14 sections to go, something like that. So this next section, this is kind of a fun one. Ultra low volume vehicle manufacturing, kit cars and home built motor vehicles. The issue right now is that particularly for the manufactured vehicles in here, there is a difficulty getting things like VIN numbers and having their exhaust certified for passing emission standards, and also having parts of their cars certified with respect to safety. And so this is looking at basically a report back on whether we can look at the vehicle emissions requirements, identify a cost-effective process for certifying the safety, and develop a streamlined process for providing a state VIN number for these vehicles. The language in here does say examine the potential to waive some or all of Vermont's motor vehicle emissions requirements. That's something that you may want to look at tweaking, just based as I've gotten a little bit of additional understanding. So California, which as we know has pretty strict emissions requirements, has a program for this that is designed for these cars that are made in low quantities, and so they don't have the certification from the EPA ahead of time, and so they've developed an alternative process to get things certified. And this is basically looking at, is there a way we could take processes from other states and implement them here to get these cars properly certified and inspected? The Senate heard from a manufacturer that makes 6 cars a year that is based out of Vermont. And then I think the rest of these cars are likely to be kit cars or home built cars, where folks have taken parts of other cars and built up their own vehicle. So, but that's a report back. Section 32, this is a fun one. Last year in the T-bill, you took away the requirement that the General Assembly approve the extension of a lease for continued operation of a state-owned railroad right-of-way. So right now the state has 4 leases for their operation on state-owned railroad rights-of-way. Under the law up until last year, every time they wanted to extend the lease, they had to get approval from the General Assembly. Last year, we took away that requirement, and this year the Senate has added it back in. So, can I do this justice? So, Senator Harrison feels very strongly that it's important for the General Assembly to weigh in on the lease renewals and make sure that the state is managing its railway assets appropriately. There's a longer discussion of that, but that's sort of the nutshell that I can give. And so but this is again something where you may want to hear it on this. Those of you who were here last year may remember the discussion. And I know Senator Brennan spoke about some of the experience the House had trying to review lease renewals in the past. He did not support this language, but supported the bill. But this language made it in. The other 4 members supported it. So, but that's what that is. Sections 33 and 34 are really quick. These are, oh, I thought we had 45 sections. We only have 35. We're there. These are 2 technical corrections. So last year we had a bill that updated the timelines for DigSafe from 48 hours after notice to 72 hours after notice to come out and mark the utilities. Unfortunately, it didn't change 2 of the sections in the DigSafe chapter. And this is making the updates in those sections. So this language is also in the budget both versions of the budget adjustment. And then was proposed for the budget, but because DigSafe is ongoing, they felt that the transportation bill would present an opportunity to get it out faster with less risk of a veto. So here it is. And that brings us to legal trails. How deep would you like me to go right now, Mr. Chair?
That's the title. This is what we're gonna do, which section here?
It's Section 35, and then we're at the,
35. Skip 35 for a second.
and that brings us to the effective dates. So that's it. If you want to take a 5-minute break, we can do that.
Maybe one other thing before we go to a 5-minute break.
Okay.
Section 30, we're going back to S 123 miscellaneous department or miscellaneous motor vehicles piece. S 123, there is section 33 that we heard. It is the very, very short one regarding the charges per electronic record. If that rings a bell, it is literally one sentence long. This will be, I'll make sure if I can put my finger on it quick enough or not.
I've got it on the screen.
Oh, there you go. The commissioner shall be paid the following fees for miscellaneous transactions, bulk electronic request, 0.303 per record. Well, since we heard testimony on this and since there was additional testimony after that in another committee, they're saying they don't feel this is ready for prime time and needs a little bit more review. And I would like to, in effect, gather that with all the questions.
So moved, everybody moves.
So move to delete this section for now and let them work back through their process and come up with a new request. And if it happens in a week, then maybe we'll consider it, but otherwise that is gonna have to wait until next year, but they have found that they need to do more work on this section. There's a motion to say we would like to remove section 33 from the DMV bill. Miscellaneous motor vehicle bill. Are everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, so moved. Let council please remove section 33 from our.
It'll be out in, whenever I show you a draft of the strike all, it'll be gone.
Okay, and so what we are gonna do is take a 6-7 minute break for our 4 o'clock, since we came back from the floor, half an hour late, and we are going to get a 30,000 foot view from our ledge council on what legal trails are, so that we can, I've been getting flooded with emails and issues and everybody else is. There is a piece in the T-bill. I would like our ledge council to at least start us. You also got emails with multiple pages of information on legal trails. We'd like our ledge council's 30,000 foot background history and 15 to 20 minute education on legal trails.